introductions, and then we'll kick right into a casual yet valuable discussion. So thank you, Jared, for putting this all together. Excellent work. And Jared does marketing at xOps, at our little IT services company here. So, you know, there's the core 3 questions there that we certainly will get to, plus many others. And let's go right to the introductions, Jared. So I'm Larry, I run xOps. We're an IT services provider. We focus exclusively on infrastructures, code, site reliability engineering, all the things that make up DevOps. And we have our chosen verticals since we're in the New York area. I think we've turned to, you know, the ones mentioned there as the natural fits. And we very much value our diverse work environment. It helps us immensely. I think it helps us do better DevOps. And we'll dive a lot more into that as we go on. So I think Judy might be the next one. Oh, Victoria is.
Hey, yeah, I'm Victoria. I'm a Vice President of Operations at STSI. This is a little bit about my background and what I do. So I have a big operations background. I started working at the help desk when I was in college, an IT help desk, and worked my way up through project management, and I've had basically every role you can have in an IT systems organization. So I also run a meetup with a few other organizers, DevOps DC, you might have heard of us. I also help co-organize DevOps Days DC with a bunch of other people. I'm a director at Women Who Code. I'm director of growth, so I especially focus on bringing in new topics in like DevOps and data science and getting those groups stood up within our meetup. And I also volunteer with Hope One Source. They are a communication messaging tool that gets word out to people experiencing or at risk of homelessness about emergency services or other support that's available to them. So yeah, that's me. I'm on Twitter. I'm also a big rock climber, and if you want to talk to me about, I will talk about it forever. So that's my nerd item. All right, next is Jamie.
Hi, I'm Jamie. I use they, them pronouns. I'm from Buffalo. I'm here in Buffalo now. And I'm not really strictly a DevOps person. I do a lot of DevOps Days conferences, so I like interface a lot with the DevOps community, but I'm really a Rubyist. Primarily, I am on Greater Than Code, which is like a pretty cool podcast that we do about, it used to be a Ruby podcast, but it's not anymore. It's about like general tech and kind of like the human stories behind tech. I'm actually out of work right now because of the pandemic, so I'm not doing Rubyist work, but I'm also a legal observer, which means that I've been like at protests protecting people's right to protest, so that's been taking up most of my time lately. Excited to be here.
Great, thank you. Banjo, you're next.
Hey guys, Banjo. I'm a software engineer at 26 Labs, mostly focused on what I call data ops, which is blending DevOps with big data and how to orchestrate giant data pipelines. I also run a meetup called Data Ops DC, really trying to push the data ops narrative, and have a podcast that I run with Victoria called the Data Ops Podcast. So it's very easy to find content that I put all around data and DevOps and driving that kind of value change.
Great, thank you, Banjo. Judy.
Oh, it's me. Yep. Okay, I have also done just about every job known to humankind. I've been a programmer forever. I've been with my company for 5 years, and I was told a disclaimer that my opinions are not necessarily those of the employer, but it's a great company. I just say stupid things every once in a while. I've done PMP and Scrum and all that kind of stuff, and I do a lot of volunteer work with different organizations. I've worked with middle schoolers, high schoolers, college students, and grown-ups, whatever we call it, to try to help everybody I can. And of course, my 2 daughters, one of or 2 of whom might be on here, are both engineers, and I think that kind of says a lot for how important it is to us and our family. I think that's it for me.
Awesome, thank you, Judy. So I think the first couple of slides are just going over definition of DevOps and diversity, and then we get into our questions. Is that right, Larry?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can, I had some thoughts on this one. The reason I put it, the 3 ways one, that's all right.
Yeah. So yeah,
We can go without.
I mean,
But
starting with the definition of DevOps, Gene Kim and the 3 ways is probably a pretty good place to start, right?
right. Well, and I just liked when I looked and copy pasted it, it's just very, there's just such a very close relationship with what we're trying to do with DevOps and what we're trying to do with diversity. As you see, the first is like system, is like the person doesn't matter, but it's how everybody blends together. That's really important. The second step is about feedback, and of course feedback's important, and continuous improvement and in all the aspects of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And the third way is, of course, continuously always learning from each other, learning from failure, not being afraid to fail. So I just feel like those are just such cool concepts in like every aspect of our life. So
yeah, and I like that you highlight how a lot of people, think DevOps is all about the technology and how do we automate this and how do we get this going, but it's the core of it is also about the culture and having those feedback loops and getting people talking to each other, right? So then, yeah, this is, now we start, then you start to take that and then you automate it and put this all in one big release pipeline. This is, I think, more about those loops. I don't know if anybody else on the panel has any thoughts about like what DevOps is, or you want to say a little bit more about that?
Well, I think, yeah, so go ahead.
We certainly find it's about the people, the engineers, and the group of people and how they work. We have clients, and those clients value those people and the work that they do more than anything else. So it would reiterate the way they work, together as a team and what they accomplish. My clients ask me for people.
Yeah, I think one of the core concepts for that is, being comfortable speaking up and giving that feedback is the key, right? So you have like first thinking about it all as one whole, and then getting at least 2 groups to talk to each other and feeling comfortable going from one group to the other. And that's inclusivity. That's making sure people feel comfortable bringing up ideas or pointing out failures or really talking to each other, right? And all the multiple circles. And then on just like defining diversity before we get started, this is an image I have in a different talk that I do that gets into more about diversity specifically, but just a reminder that there are a number of different ways when we say diversity, what does that mean? There are the internal dimensions, which are all protected by law, but there's also many other dimensions of your background, your personality that can make you different, and your contributions to the workplace that are still valuable, right? And how do we balance those while we're working together and learn how to like have empathy and communicate across these groups that can be really different from each other, I think, right? So, and then now we're on to the fireside chat part.
We are. Well, let me please, and the best way I think right now for the participants outside the panel to ask questions would be through the chat. Let's start with that. So feel free to chime in with that, but to just take the original questions that the problem statements we expressed in our invitation. How does DevOps encourage diversity and inclusion to the panel?
I found as someone kind of on the outside looking in some ways with the DevOps community is that like in tech, there's a lot of different people that are doing different things. And just because you're doing the same kind of thing or using the same language doesn't really make you a community necessarily if you don't like spend the time to kind of cultivate that community. And I think that my experience with the DevOps community is that it is like a very carefully cultivated like community and culture. I think that like the DevOps Days conferences, I've been to them in a bunch of different cities now, and they've all been really amazing experiences. And the reason I started going to them and getting into DevOps is because I do a lot of talks that are about diversity and inclusion and mental health and these kind of things that are real people skills, and not all tech conferences value that. And I find that the DevOps community really values that. And so that kind of pulled me into it. And I found that like people that value that kind of thing get pulled into this community in a really welcoming way.
I think like we keep repeating, because DevOps or DevSecOps or Dev whatever ops is putting groups of people that might or might not have been diverse together, but there's the whole, and it starts with Agile really. You're a multifunctional team where everybody really does need to know a little bit about everything else. And like the first question on the other slide was talking about when you enter somebody into the team, and you can have somebody that isn't as knowledgeable technically as maybe some of the other people on the team, but there's always things that they can do, like, you know, code reviews or documentation. And there's so much to the whole process that you can, and people are included, people are part of the process right away. It's not like you have to sit there and read a manual for 6 weeks before you can even look at the code. There's always, you know, something for everybody, no matter what your strengths are. And I think that's super important.
Yeah.
I would add, oh, you go ahead, Banjo.
Sure. So when I think of DevOps, it's really about breaking down silos. You can't have collaboration if everyone's siloed out. So having that kind of culture that kind of brings collaboration together at its core is really going to allow team members to really communicate with each other and kind of get that inclusive feel. So moving that siloed environment at the old days and really bringing that collaboration really fosters that inclusivity of DevOps.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree with what was also said about like the DevOps Days community and culture that's being built and how intentional some of the cultural aspects are in those groups and communities. One example I give is like blameless postmortems. I learned about that concept at a DevOps Days conference, and the idea that you want to focus on what actually happened and then what are we going to do going forward, and not assigning individual blame, and how important that is to make people feel comfortable enough to talk about what's actually happening and to solve those issues in the system and really understand them well. It is a big, I think, why it is you find more diversity and more inclusion in a DevOps culture.
The blameless postmortems is always a big step for us, because people, you know, it's one thing where senior people say, hey, I'm not going to blame you. And in our group, they don't. But it's the junior people feeling like, oh, I'm not going to get blamed because they've been in a bad experience.
Yeah. Another thing to say it and then to actually put it into practice and not get like emotionally wrapped up in the moment and to run those meetings. I've been in one somewhere it's like, oh, we're going to be blameless postmortem, but whose fault is this?
Right. And to get the people, you know, whose tendency is, well, they always end up blaming me anyhow, you know, just no, not here. And we're more effective that way.
I liked what Judy said also about like kind of starting with Agile, because I agree with that. I think that like Agile, when it's done well or done right, kind of inherently takes into consideration like the different ways that people work, because if you're working in that kind of Agile way and like tracking your team's progress in that kind of Agile way, you're not really doing that effectively unless you take into consideration like the differences between different people in your team.
Right, and I think that's, if you're trying to be more DevOps, let's say, like one thing you want to focus on is like, is every voice that's on my team being heard, and are they feeling like their contributions are warranted? And that's something that you have to, when someone is on the diversity spectrum and they might be a little bit different, maybe they prefer voice over email, or there could be a million things that you want to consider when you're trying to make sure that everybody feels comfortable contributing.
That's true. And just even in this context, there was, when the whole pandemic first started, you know, people are like, you have to turn on your cameras when we do video chats. And I actually, even though I'm on today, I really don't like being on camera. And I think it kind of progressed to, well, some people Slack and some people video chat and some people email. And communication is important, but it doesn't matter how you do it.
Terrific stuff. We touched on the next question on this slide, already a little bit, but I think it's turning it around. It's a question I don't hear asked or answered very often in any of the conferences I've been to. How does diversity help us do better and more DevOps? And I certainly have a specific point of view on this. I know some of you guys do as well.
Yeah, I think the way that I think about this is the value of diversity in biology and in neurobiology, and how everything that's ever happened to you in your background has made a specific algorithm that you take to approach problems with. So if there's a problem in the system and you're trying to diagnose what's happening, you have a certain tool set of your background, everything that you learned, every like programming language you have, and job you've ever had that you can apply to that situation. So if you're hiring someone from the exact same background, they're going to have a very similar algorithm to approach that problem. But if you hire someone from a completely different background, and one example is someone I met at a DevOps Days conference who worked for Mom's Organic Market, and she was more of a network system engineer. Well, now she's a senior DevOps engineer, and she's amazing. And she just like designed this new on-call system for us that she got from her experience at Mom's, just to solve like one of our basic operational issues. So that's for me why I see it, how I see it in my personal life. I would say, I want to hear what everybody else thinks too.
Yeah, I mean, and you've touched on it when we had our previous discussion, every different perspective brings light to new subjects. And one of my stories that I like to tell is when I was at College Park. I think I told you guys this one. And one of the projects they had to do for the women in tech was find something that makes somebody underrepresented unique. And why is like the mainstream not thinking of them when something is designed? So of course the main example is there's no place for a woman to put her purse in a car. But then there's like, my dad only had one arm. So, what can you do to take into consideration somebody with something like that when you're designing something? And I think that's such a huge part of DevOps is making sure that you're not missing, all the edge cases. And people aren't edge cases, but you're not missing any group of people. So I think that's why it's so important to be diverse.
Yeah, I think especially in the edge cases, generally those edge cases actually have benefits for everyone. So the reason why you wouldn't want to be able to discriminate against this marginalized group also applies to everyone else. So it is an important thing to consider.
I totally agree with that. I think that when you're talking about, again, I agree people aren't edge cases, but when you're talking about this kind of thing, like it's really hard to keep all of those things in your head. And we try to do it because we want to be as inclusive as we can. But like, I really think ultimately the best way to do that is just to have people who like, of course it's in their head because it's something that they think about because it's part of them, and their life. And so I think that in tech, one of our big kind of responsibilities is to like minimize harm that we're doing. And that can come in like all sorts of ways that you wouldn't think about. And so having more people on your team with more different backgrounds and perspectives who can say like, oh, actually, I think, this might cause harm to a certain community in a way that wasn't discussed or didn't occur to other people is like really valuable.
Yeah, DevOps really helps reduce fear in an organization. So if you don't want people to be scared to do something, if you have too many people in the same background, things kind of just blend together. So really kind of creating that platform environment where people could not be afraid to say something, try something, build something really helps enable more DevOps that you're including a more collaborative culture. So it's really about reducing fear in your team and enabling collaboration. So diversity really pushes that to really drive home the power of DevOps.
I like reducing fear. I had never thought about it that way.
I like that a lot. I think reduce fear, and I think I really like what we've said about the ethics of it, right? And that if you're designing systems to be used by the public, but your team is not representative of what the public actually looks like, is dangerous. And yeah, I think Banjo and I talk about ethics and data science projects, I think on our podcast that's coming out soon. But then also going back to what was said, I didn't completely lose the thread on where I was going, but you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. What I've noticed and what I've taken advantage of is there's bias in the world. And if you read books unrelated to DevOps, Moneyball by Michael Lewis, the Dan Ariely books on psychology and, you know, the irrationality people do in decision making, there's bias in the world. And it's also a world of a shortage of good DevOps engineers. So that means that there's underrepresented groups of good DevOps engineers that have been biased against for irrational reasons, and they're available and they're really good. And, you know, as a company that hires, right, that's an advantage to me if I can strip away bias and, you know, find those people. So a kind of highly capitalist reason for diversity in DevOps. But I love the idea of bias being irrational and taking advantage of it. This is sort of our second set of questions. There was a great question at the end of that last slide about how do you do this? I'm always very practical when I ask questions of the experts. How do you actually make it more diverse? What do you and your organization?
I think someone mentioned this a little bit already, but or maybe it wasn't exactly this, but investing in resources that can provide that expertise, because there is so much nuance and bias and things you need to counteract within your organization. Having an expert, you know, review your interview process, review, you know, how are you doing performance reviews and all of those, and having some human resource talent, whatever you call it, to focus on those issues is really important. And yeah, that was the first thing I would say. So make sure that you're actually, like, if you care about it, invest in it. And even like myself, I say actually my director of talent is on the call with us today. And she's more of an expert in building those structural pieces in your organization than I am. So that's the first thing I would start off with. But
I think, you know, and two, and I was, again, earlier talking about the leaky bucket thing. You not only have to get people, but you have to keep them. And I have this little list next to me of, you know, things that people do like and don't like. And they include things like people like to be heard, which is obviously very obvious, but people don't always listen. People like to be respected. You know, they need to be understood. They need to feel like they belong, and they need to feel like they're doing something meaningful and important, which is good when everybody is always part of the process, because you feel like you're helping even when you've just started. And then in terms of the other thing that's important is having allies and people that are going to help you, because I know as a woman I can do a lot, you know, for myself. But I think generally sometimes I need a white man to pull for me, to speak up for me, you know, and I work with people that are willing to do that. So that's really good. And also role models, and I'm sorry I'm talking a lot, having somebody that looks like you, that is near you, and they don't have to be the CEO. They can be the same level as you, they can be one level up, and somebody that you can aspire to be, that makes you not afraid of who you are. And so those are a couple of things. That's my list.
I want to disagree lightly with something that Victoria said, which is like, I agree that kind of stuff in hiring and recruiting and the pipeline is like really important. I think that like one of the big ones there is like how you write job postings and how people are going to perceive them. But you said that like that's the first thing you would do, and I think I want to lightly disagree on it being like the first thing. I think the first thing is like making the environment at your company like already a safe and good place for people before you start making those steps about recruiting and pipeline. Because like, to bring in, if you're a company that doesn't have diversity at your company and you decide you want to do that, and you're like, okay, great, we're going to bring in some diverse people and they like can help us with our culture, I think that's like kind of an irresponsible thing to do. I think if you're going to like make that outreach, that's great, but you have to make sure that you're inviting people into a place where they're like set up to succeed already.
Oh yeah, I will agree with that. I'll issue a correction. I did not mean that recruiting should be your first focus. I think investing in the expertise around diversity and inclusion,
Oh
that's
yeah,
like
definitely.
your organization wherever you need it, right? Like if you're in a completely monoculture organization and you try to start doing this stuff on your own, like you might be overlooking some internal biases that led you to be that kind of organization. And it's going to be very difficult to change it around without some help.
That's a great point.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it really comes down to, I guess, community involvement. So when you talk about DevOps, you're talking about collaboration and inclusion, and then really comes down to the community. So what type of community do you want to build? And of your organization, what kind of community are they fostering? So that way to help show that maybe through meetups, civic engagement, any way can really highlight the community that your organization offers. That's how you really start.
That's a great point. I think there's like a difference, like what can you do as a company versus what can you do personally? And like personally, there's so many meetups out there of all different kinds of groups that you can learn different things from. There's Black Code Collective, there's Women Who Code, there's just a bunch of great meetups, at least in the DC area, I see that are really awesome and expanding your network so that you can pull people in to your company, make referrals and mentor and help people on their careers.
Terrific answers. Terrific answers. So Adam Bronstein brings us a question from the chat. I'll read it. How does diversity and inclusion either benefit and or detract from the quality and productivity of the DevSecOps environment? That's Adam Bronstein from Robert Francis Group.
I wouldn't entertain the thought that it detracts from quality. I think the only case that would be is if you, like, say, for example, hired people without thinking through your diversity and inclusion plan and didn't invest any resources toward it. And now you're having conflict because people weren't set up for success or set up to have empathy for each other. And that could be one way. But I think it's been fairly well proven that diversity does benefit organizations, and organizations that have diversity throughout from top to bottom in their organization are more successful than others.
One thing when you think of DevSecOps, security normally is ignored, but when you're thinking sec, you want to make sure that everything's secure. So we talked about reducing fear. You don't want, if somebody's afraid to push code because it's not going to patch something, that's really not an inclusive environment. You really want people to not be afraid to play around, try things, and if something doesn't work, have that be automated and built in and explain that. So in a DevSecOps environments, people should be more freely able to try something. And we have really kind of a diverse culture. People are more likely to collaborate, try to do things, and not be afraid to push the wrong button or trust something wrong. So it really comes back to that reducing fear mindset.
I also think that like fostering a situation that's like healthy for people at your workplace is always going to help with productivity, which was like kind of the other part of the question. Like anytime that people feel like safe and supported, which is something that's really important if you want, like, as we said, to encourage diversity and inclusion at your company, but like that's going to make everyone feel more safe and supported, and that's gonna boost your productivity just like naturally.
There is one other negative thing that a lot of people talk about when a company is trying, not necessarily in a well-rounded way, to increase their diversity, and they always send out the same representatives. There are women that are like, you know, the token or the token any other minority, and they're like, well, you have to go represent us. You have to get your picture taken. You have to go to this talk, and it wears you out. I mean, you know, I volunteered to do this, so I'm fine with it. But I've heard a lot of stories about why am I always the one? So, but when the organization does it right, that doesn't really need to happen.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's like, oh, we hired one woman, so now you are now in charge of the diversity of the company. That's what not to do, kind of.
Right. Okay. Thanks for that question, Adam. I think on the next page, I wanted to ask the question about mentors. It's basically, have you had mentors and what have they done? Are you a mentor? And how do you do mentorship? It's on the next slide. And I know I'm dying to hear the answer to that question.
So I feel like I'm really old school, and when I started work, there was nobody ever encouraged us to have mentors. But obviously, I have a lot of people that I respect a lot, that I've learned a lot from, and some of them know, and some of them don't. So you really need to learn. And one thing people say, you need to have a mentor, and that's absolutely wrong. You need to have so many different people that you learn for so many different aspects of your job and what you do and who you are. But I've got some informal and some formal mentorships. I've got, somebody at college, a couple college students and coworkers and former coworkers. And it's just a matter of having I want to say a shoulder to cry on, but somebody to talk to. And all of my relationships that way are very, very two-way. These people, I learn as much from somebody coming straight out of college or in college than they do from me, because there's so much information to share, and we all have, different life experiences, and we all can learn from each other.
I truly love the concept of mentorship. It's like really important to me. I agree about the two-way street. But what I kind of wanted to say about it was that I think that there's real value. Like when I think about mentorship and diversity and inclusion together, I think of like kind of two relationships. Like I had a couple of mentors at the beginning of my career that were like successful white men. And I benefited hugely from that. Like them advocating for me. That was like, when I was new and junior, that was hugely beneficial for me and my career and my confidence. And so I think there's great value in that. But now that I am taking on mentees, I tend to like find other people that are underrepresented, often in like similar ways to me. And I think that there's great value in that too, because you're kind of coming on the same page. It's like a little bit more of that, I guess, shoulder to cry on a little bit. Like I understand what you're going through. When it's tough, but like here I've done a lot of these things and these are things that worked for me. And so I think that there's real value in kind of both of those, having someone who understands you in like a more profound way, but also having someone who can kind of advocate for you in a way that it would be difficult to advocate for yourself.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And it makes me think about sponsorship versus mentorship, like someone really advocating for you within the company and looking out for your career. That's huge. And one advice I give to people in addition to that is to make sure you have more than one advocate. If you can, like try to get multiple people looking out for you. Because what I've seen happen is that the one person looking out for you leaves, and then there's new management, you get passed over. It's very easy to get discouraged. But I like the different types of mentors, and I agree with Judy that there's just so much to learn out there. Like I feel like Banjo is my data engineering mentor, and I have like a mentor for every different little piece of a system I might need to know. So if a random question comes up to my level, I can reach out and be in contact with the person who's an expert on that as soon as possible, right?
It really comes down to like wanting to learn and I guess mentorship, and also you putting out content as well. Like I like to write data ops content, find people in that similar field, talk with them. Meetups have been a great place to find other people that talk about things. If you're interested, go up and talk with them. So kind of just building that community network, you naturally find mentors and people to engage with through that as well.
Great. Here's a question. Not an easy question. It's related to the fourth bullet point on the screen, but we can make them separate questions. But here's the question. Has being part of an underrepresented group affected your career positively or negatively? Not an easy question.
I'll say, oh, you go.
Sure. I guess from my experience, I've always been I learned from a traditional software engineering background, so I had a graduate or undergrad in computer science. I was able to find a job fairly quickly before I even graduated. So I kind of always had that mindset of learning, building stuff. I never really thought of myself as getting past other opportunities. I always kind of grew at the level I expected. So for me, it's been maybe just because I'm in the DC metro area, there's a lot of tech jobs. I've always been involved in, I've been always making apps, and I've always kind of had that mindset of to build and learn and connect. So for me personally, it hasn't been an issue, but I know I'm not I'm an exception in some cases, but for me personally, I haven't had too much issues that I can recall.
I think we're lucky in DC. We live in one of the best areas for women in tech, and there's a lot of diversity, and we have a really great community here. I mean, I would say maybe both in some ways. Like, I think that it's made me very tenacious, but I have, had issues here and there about all different things, not just like being a woman, but also age and all. You get a lot of assumptions made about you regardless. And I think people who stay in the industry a long time have a very thick skin and have been through a lot and are generally very, very good at their jobs.
Yeah, I was just going to say, some of the what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? Some of the negative things that I've had to address in work based on those things have actually helped me, cope with other things in life. So, maybe it's not always bad, a stepping stone.
Do we think tech is better than most industries?
No, I think that tech makes a lot of noise about it, though, which is good. But there's, yeah, it depends on what part of industry you're in, I think.
I'd like to take this question too before we get off of it about, like, sorry to interrupt, but like pros and cons in your career. So I'm trans. I did my pronouns at the beginning, so maybe it was obvious or maybe it wasn't obvious. But like as a trans person in tech, I have also felt in a lot of ways like very lucky and like I'm the exception, as like Banjo was saying. But because everywhere I've been has been like a very respectful situation for me. I've had like my actual jobs have been good. But I said like lucky, and I don't really think it's necessarily luck. I think that it takes a lot of introspection for me, like when I'm job hunting, which I am right now, like what do I need to know about a company when I'm going into it to like determine if I'm going to be safe there or not. And so I think it limits my options in a lot of ways, because not necessarily even that I would be passed up. My career has gone pretty well and I have credentials, but like I might have to pass up opportunities that I could take because it wouldn't be safe or comfortable for me. And like doing a lot of events, I feel like I've had a platform to talk about a lot of this stuff that is really important to me, and I'm really grateful for that. But I've also had like tough experiences at in-person events where like, okay, there's a lot of people here and I don't know all of them, and are all of them going to be respectful of me? And maybe they're not always. And so I agree with you about like having to have a thick skin in a lot of ways, but I think that I guess it's made me like strong, and it's definitely made me introspective about like what are my needs and like what do I have to do to make sure that those needs are being met. So I wish that I guess it didn't all have to fall on my shoulders in that way, because it can be exhausting. But I also feel like it's a very important skill for me to have to like be able to protect myself in my career, but like also in my life.
I second the need to like identify if a company is safe or not. And that is something that you put a little more thought into when you're different.
Thank you all. Thank you. I have one in the queue from the chat box, but I do want to get to in our last 15 minutes advice, right? So there's kind of two questions. I think we could take some time and get them both in with the same set of answers. What is the one piece of practical advice you would give to someone starting out / What DevOps work can you give to someone with less experience? So piece of advice, and what are good projects to work on early in your career?
Yeah, I always say when people want to run DevOps and start programming is to deploy something, build something you're interested in. A lot of tutorials that walk you through stuff, but I always stay focused and passionate about problems that I myself am having problems with or I'm experiencing, and I build a solution around that and how I can deploy that to the cloud, how can I automatically test that, and then learn building blocks for that project. So I would say something that you're doing that you see on a day-to-day. So an example for me was like, how can I find more meetup speakers? So I built a solution around getting data from like Twitter and say, oh, these people talk about these kind of topics. And then how can I make a solution that's automated and get me people that I should reach out to? So, and I'm interested in that project. So I'm going to spend more time on that. I'm not going to say, oh, I don't feel like it today. So always trying to find a solution that you have interest in and you care about. And with that, you'll learn to build the solutions for that. And that will help you as an engineer.
Okay.
I think I touched on that newbie question earlier. I think there's a lot of testing and documenting and code reviews that you can do and start helping and start learning right away. So that's that. In terms of advice, I'm all about the be yourself, network, work your butt off. People will notice. It's really hard to give people advice because everybody's different.
Yeah, I agree. I think documentation is good. My advice would be like, if you're building anything, you have to write at least a page of documentation about what it is that you did, what links did you go to find that review, and especially if you're working with a more senior engineer, that way you can make your own progress, you can lay out your thought for why you did that the way you did it, and then when they go back and look at your work, you have a full explanation for what is this and why is this built the way that it is. And that way you can work on how you're thinking about it, and you can address that over time and build your skill sets. And for me also with DevOps, I'm actually doing DevOps 101 next week at Women Who Code, so you should definitely come to that meetup would be my second piece of advice. And keep going to meetups and go to Code and Coffees and go to DevOps meetups group and Data Ops meetup group and just learn as much as you can and get used to reading a lot and also writing a fair amount of documentation too.
My piece of advice, I think, would be just because someone else is like more outwardly confident than you doesn't mean that they're better at things than you. Because like there's a lot of things that create confidence in people that aren't necessarily being better. Like it's being treated like you should be confident and being treated like you know what you're doing, which if you're not an underrepresented person in tech is much more likely, but just because you haven't been treated that way doesn't mean that you're not as good as someone who has.
1,000%. And I always tell people, like, because the new engineers or new developers, they feel like they don't know anything, they don't have any context, they don't feel confident at their job. It's been 3 months and they're still struggling, and it's like it never really goes away. Like they just keep building new stuff and you have to learn it, and like AWS comes out with a whole new thing every year. So I think getting comfortable, just being a little bit on your edge until you're confident in the work that you can do, right?
I've been a senior engineer for like 5 years or something like that, and I still don't feel as confident as I wish I was, and I have to remind myself of this a lot.
Well, from the other perspective too, like when you're interviewing people, and they're all confident, and you have to really take everything with a grain of salt when you're really trying to see how somebody's going to fit in your organization and see who they really are. There's a lot of unpacking that you have to do when you're speaking with somebody.
Terrific. Let's see. There's a chat question. Do the diversity and inclusion issues change for better or worse now that we're all, or many of us, are primarily in work from home situations? Are there new challenges new opportunities? Have things changed in the past 3 months?
I do a whole talk about this.
Do you
It's
really?
called, it's called Achieving Inclusivity Through Remote Work. And I think that I've been a remote worker for my entire career. And I don't think that I would have excelled in the way that I have if I hadn't had that opportunity for a lot of reasons that involve being from underrepresented groups. You know, I actually have pretty severe anxiety disorder, and I find it much easier to work from home than to work from an office and have to go in every day. Additionally, as a trans person, as I've been in this process of gender transition, it's much more comfortable and more private to be able to kind of do that when you're working from home. So those are the two big reasons for me, but lots of people have lots of reasons why they feel that working from home would be beneficial to them. Obviously not everybody, but lots of people do. And I feel like lots of people have been being told over and over, well, you know, we can't, that's not how we work. We don't want people that are fully remote. We don't want to distribute our team in that way. And so now that everyone has been forced to, I feel like we've opened Pandora's box in a way, because we've been telling people, no, we can't for so long, that now that we are, I think it's going to be hard to tell people okay, no, well now we can't again. And I think that, you know, work from home is not for everybody on a permanent basis, but I think that there are lots of people that could really benefit from it who haven't had that opportunity. And my hope is now they will kind of permanently.
Yeah, I agree. I think it has so many benefits and it's so good for people. The one thing about this particular situation with schools not being open is that parents are negatively affected in their ability to get their work done, especially if you have small children. It's almost like you don't have an option. You have to pay for that daycare, or you have to not work, or so that's an impact. I mean, obviously we're not going to be able to solve that by ourselves here, but.
It's working at home. Sometimes you do miss some serendipitous, water cooler style talks with people, and just getting around. So there are some. Me being an extrovert, I like being in the office and talking with people and engaging with people. And talk about collaboration earlier. DevOps is really about breaking down those silos. Working from home is kind of a different feel. I mean, we have Slack channels and whatnot, but we had those still when we went in the office. So I feel like there's an element missing, and trying to kind of recreate that has been harder offline. Being in the office before, having built relationships, it's been easier. But if I was starting at a new place without knowing anybody there, I feel like it would have been harder to kind of make those kind of collaborative connections with people. Maybe because I haven't done remote work in any kind of long period of time. For me, it might be a hard adjustment for that kind of DevOps kind of mindset.
Yeah, you have to really provide that engaging remote work culture, which can be difficult. And that's the side effect for me, is that I'm, instead of meeting up with coworkers for happy hour, we're meeting up with masked and social distance walks. So it's forcing me to be healthier. But I don't know if that's related to your question or not. But that's how I get my social interaction now. So I can't do it in the office. If there's anybody you can just meet up with. Actually, on Friday, I'm going to go work from my sister's house just to have another human in the office.
I agree with what Banjo said too about different opportunities and different ways that we connect with each other. I think that remote work needs to be done intentionally, and it's hard because now a lot of people have been thrust into this situation where they're working remote and it hasn't been done intentionally. But the longer that we're kind of doing this, the more I hope that places are starting to cultivate that kind of healthy distributed culture. Maybe because they're forced to, but in any case, if they're doing it, I think that's good. So.
We're coming to the end of our hour, and we asked an hour from the panelists, but we have a couple more questions. I could club them together. So you might want to pick a company you don't work for currently, but you're free to pick any company you want. And I have my stories as well. What do you wish you could change within your corporate environment? And will mash that one up with what makes people want to leave a job. I'll start if you want. I remember that I worked for some very large software companies, and what drove most people crazy was the insularity of the development group and the kind of culture, the kind of frat culture of that group. And I do run a DevOps company, and what I believe is listen to the engineers and work your way down the supply chain of software to, the people who are closest to it, and listen to the engineers and do what they are suggesting. And they're probably suggesting a lot of the right things. But when you hit a critical mass, or if there's poor leadership or the culture isn't right, it's amazing how far off track a group of guys with the similar mindset can go with not listening to other ideas, not wanting to do what anyone but their, alpha leader suggests. So if I could change anything about a corporate environment that I've witnessed, is goes to what Banjo was saying a little bit about breaking down silos and getting other points of view and accepting. It could be suggestions, or it could be ideas from the outside of a core group of very capable people. And I don't think I'm alone in thinking that with, if you find very insular dev groups, maybe that have been together a very, very long time.
Great. Well, I'm a VP of operations, so if I want to make change in my organization, I'm the one who gets to do it. So I can talk about the change that I've made since being with STSI. That might be interesting. So I started in the summer of last year, and in the fall we kicked off our strategy sessions for the business, and that included diversity and inclusion and the direction we wanted to go with our contracts and everything. And so in the last 6 months, we've converted to a women-owned and operated company. We've hired 60% of our female engineer and developers since I've been here. We've also, launched our diversity and inclusion numbers, like actually collecting them and reviewing them and making sure we're publishing them. So that should be coming out soon. There's more changes coming, but I think that a big part for me, like what I try to do with my career, is to just be kind of a magnet and bring more people along with me and share what my key values are within the organization and get an entire team working together towards those goals. But that's kind of probably a little bit in a different role than the rest of the panel here.
Yeah, my experience that people don't like at jobs is a lack of agency. So meaning that can't really dictate what they do. They can't kind of see the big picture. Things are very micromanaged. You don't feel like you're in control. So talk about DevOps collaboration, inclusivity. You want to feel like you're contributing, you're doing something. You're not scared to do something. That lack of fear comes up again. So really kind of enabling agency and people having your team be able to see what's going on, understand, be able to reach out to people if they don't understand stuff. Kind of bolstering that culture is going to make people more likely to stay. And if I don't feel like I'm contributing, I can't do anything, I'm scared to do anything, I'm definitely going to start looking for a new job.
I totally agree with that. What I was going to say is pretty simple. I think people just want to feel valued and respected. And I think that totally ties in with what Banjo was saying. Like, if I don't feel valued and respected, and that can, manifest in a whole bunch of ways, feeling like you can't ask questions, feeling like people aren't listening to you, anything like this. There's like a whole list, but like, if I don't feel that way, I'm gonna want to leave. And like, on the converse of that, if I do feel that way, I'm gonna want to stay. Like at my last job, I stayed longer than I would have. Like, I had kind of reached the point where I felt like I've accomplished a lot here. I had a good run, and like, maybe it's time to do something else. And then I stayed for like a year past that because like my team I felt so valued and respected that like I didn't want to walk into another situation. So eventually I kind of like got over that fear, But like my last company got me for probably a year longer than they would have normally because they made me feel so good in those ways.
And the other thing, Jamie, I think if you're feeling respected and happy in your job, I think that you'll bring people that you respect to come work with you. And circling back to the beginning, you'll have a more comfortable environment with people that you're comfortable with.
I totally agree.
That's a big positive to that.
Yeah, people leave because it's a toxic environment. They are undervalued and not getting paid what they're worth, or they don't see any room to grow within the organization, right?
Or you're not heard. You know, when I was in a big organization, I just never felt like anything I said really mattered to anybody.
But that's a toxic environment though, right?
Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
not getting listened to, not getting heard. And that stuff like can build slowly over time and just gnaw away at you eventually till it bubbles over at some point.
Well, that brings us to the bottom of the hour. And I want to thank everybody on the call. I hope it was useful to everybody. I, in particular, want to thank Jared for organizing it for us, and Jamie and Banjo and Judy and Victoria. It was a pleasure working with you guys and meeting you and learning from you. This was a great experience for me. I feel good leading this session. I'm getting all sorts of notes on all sorts of channels about how valuable people found it. So, thank you very much. Namaste. So have a great night. I know some of you are just starting your day. Actually, it was a worldwide audience. So have a great night and a great day. Take care.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Jared.
Thank you guys for being on. It was awesome.
Thank you guys.
Everyone appreciated it. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.